Okay, so where we've got to so far is that we've understood the basic concept of creating a evaporating cloud, the 5 entities, what to put in those entities, started to expose the assumptions that define the relationship between those entities, and then we tested those assumptions for validity. So where we are now is we want to scrutinise those assumptions that we exposed in part 6 to identify that subset of those assumptions that we consider to be invalid. So this section deals specifically with that. So invalid assumptions, they're the ones that we just aren't sure are correct. And what we mean by correct is it really so? Is it true that what we have stated it as an assumption is the case, or is true? And it may be that we can find examples of where it may be true in one situation but not true in all situations, in which case this is a good indicator that perhaps the assumption is false. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through those assumptions, not in great detail, but by example, to help identify those that we consider to be invalid or subject to further scrutiny, using the marketing example that we've been using so far. So here's a summary of those assumptions, the white boxes, and you can see there are a number of them. There was a fair bit of effort that obviously needed to go into exposing those, and some thoughtfulness as to, questioning why it is that we believe the relationships between these entities are in fact true. So before we get into the ones that are invalid, I want to use one of the assumptions as an example of a valid assumption. So if we look at the entity relationships between B and D, where we say in order to have a successful marketing campaign, we must have the house owner adequately fund the marketing costs, because, taking this one, because the owner paying the marketing costs recognises the owner's right to terminate the campaign and assign the property for sale to another agent without financial penalty to others. So this assumption appears to be reasonably logical. When we talk about financial penalty, it's financial penalty in relation to the marketing costs, not necessarily termination of contract where there might be a financial penalty. So let's assume that there's provisions within the contract between the principal and agent that allows for termination subject to certain things, such as the passing of time. The contract may have only been valid for 30 days or 90 days, whatever it might be, and there might have been other provisions that allowed for termination. So what we're saying in this particular assumption is that if the owner pays the marketing costs, this recognises the owner's right to terminate the campaign, because he's saying, well, I'm going to terminate the relationship between you and I as principal and agent. I have the right to terminate this campaign and assign the property for sale to another agent, and I'm not expecting any financial penalty to result with respect to marketing costs as a result of me paying for these things. So that wouldn't be the case otherwise, where, say, the agent was paying, a termination of contract occurs, the agent's quite right to say, well, I've made commitments, you need to pay for, regardless of whether you get any benefit from them. So this is an example of a valid assumption that exists between these two entities, B and D. So now let's try and find some invalid assumptions, and it really needs us to go through each one of these and scrutinise them and ask ourselves, is it really so? Are there other situations where this may not be valid? And you can see here that I've identified a number which I consider to be invalid. And so quickly going through those, and you can see that they apply particularly in the bottom line of reasoning between maximising returns to owner, and C, which is engaging a real estate agent that accepts marketing responsibility and accountability. And then the second area between that, item C, and D prime, the the second part of the conflict. So in the first section, one of the assumptions that I've questioned is that there is no misalignment between the real estate agent's objectives and the seller's objectives due to the principal-agent relationship. And for those that have any understanding of contract law, the agent is required to act in the best interests of the principal. But of course, the issue is that the agent is also in business to make profit and make money himself, and so, or her itself, and so therefore there will be times where the profit of the agent could be actually compromised by an increase in the profit that the seller or principal seeks to gain from the house, and the marketing costs are a classic example of that, where if the agent pays for that, the seller's profit increases, with where the agent doesn't pay for that and the seller pays for it, then his profit decreases. So here's an example of misalignment. Moving on, the other two below that, which are the first one, it's in the interest of the agent to sell the house for the best price to maximise their commission. Again, that may be true in general, but there are specific instances. For example, if I've got a house on the market for $500,000 and I'm paying a 4% commission, which is $20,000 to the agent, the incentive for him to try and get $550,000, which would give him a commission of $22,000, means that the incremental fee or commission that he earns is only $2,000, which is a very, could be considered by some to be a modest benefit for that incremental increase of $50,000, which then goes to the owner less the $2,000 worth of commission. So whilst in general there is alignment between the agent and the seller at getting it to that $500,000 mark in the first place, incremental increases in the price of the house after that could be considered by the agent to be pretty modest and not really in his interest to pursue. So that's why I've raised that one as an assumption that I consider could be invalid under certain circumstances. And then the final one in this box is the owner's objective and the agent's payment structure are 100% aligned. This again, using the example that I just gave, is proof that that is not the case, and so, or cannot be the case in some instances, or may not be the case in some instances. And so again, that assumption is one that I'm calling into question. So now moving on to the assumptions between C and D prime. The first assumption that I call into question is this one here, where the assumption being made is that the agent is responsible for selling the house and the marketing costs are therefore their cost of doing business. It's true that the agent is primarily responsible for assisting the seller or the principal in selling the house, but the agent acts on the advice and instructions of the principal, and the agent can make suggestions, but ultimately it's the principal that decides on the approach to be taken. So I call this one into question because I don't think it properly defines the agent's role, and certainly I don't necessarily agree that an agent that's responsible for selling necessarily then extends logically into the marketing costs being their responsibility as well. The second one down here, which is where the agent pays the marketing costs, this decision has no negative effect on achieving the maximum price for the shortest time possible. It's quite possible under certain circumstances where if you enforce this view that the agent must pay the marketing costs, that develops animosity with the agent. The agent accepts it because he wants your business, but then the price that he gets, going back to the point that I made over here, or the price that he recommends is such that he's more inclined to push you towards a quicker sale at a lower price, because the incremental interest or the incremental fees that he earns as a result of those extra as a result of the extra price doesn't give him a significant return. So it's quite possible that his view is that let's just get a price and sell this as soon as possible rather than wait out for a higher price. So as you can see, by looking at each and every one of these assumptions, we can call into question some of them. Others we leave alone, and of course it's a question of which ones we do want to look at with scrutiny or for further investigation, particularly when we start to look at identifying injections, which is the next part of this video series.